The following is a conversation with Kristina Campbell, a science writer that specialises in tiny things. In other words, all the microorganisms that live on and inside of our bodies. This is a really interesting conversation. We recorded it remotely. It was our first remote podcast with a guest, and I'm really grateful for Kristina joining on and producing such amazing content for all of our listeners. What you can expect to learn from this podcast is a lot about probiotics. We talked about what makes good good and what makes bad bad. So if you're somebody who consumes probiotics or is thinking about taking probiotics and wanting to take that next step, you should absolutely tune into this episode because we really dig into where the field is at and what are some of the key quality criteria that you should be looking for if you're wanting to embark on a probiotics journey. We also talked about where we see the field going in the next 5 years and even further on from that. Talked about some of the recent drug approvals as well, which we're all really excited about. This was the first remote recording that we did, and it went really well. We used an online platform that enabled me to dial in from the studio and Kristina to dial in from Canada, which was awesome. I'm really grateful to her for making it work with the time difference. Now, if you're listening to this podcast and you think you might be a great guest, but you're living remotely, or you might know somebody who would make an awesome guest, please connect and we can have a discussion about getting you or someone you know on. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please kindly consider giving us a 5-star review. It actually makes a massive difference to the content promotion within the algorithms on the platforms that we produce and share on. So if you haven't already and you're enjoying it, please kindly consider doing that, and you can help promote Inside Matters for the benefit of the masses. This is Inside Matters. My name is Dr. James McElroy. I hope you enjoy it. So why don't we start then by you telling me how you got interested in the microbiome field?
Yeah, good question. I started back about 10 years ago, and I was having, my own gut health issues. And I think, at that point, I did want to have a scientific mindset, and I wanted to look to science to help me solve my problem. But I did find there was not a lot out there that was for, scientifically based things for improving gut health. And then I came across this area of science that was just starting to emerge, and it was the microbiome. And so I really started to dig in, and I ended up starting a blog, which was sort of to work through my own thoughts and processing of some of the articles coming out on how diet affected gut health and this thing called the microbiome and what was it and how did it help our health. And so, through that blog, someone contacted me to join a project, a writing project, interviewing different scientists, and it sort of grew from there and then led to this career writing essentially full-time about the microbiome.
Awesome. What were some of your first blog posts like? Can you remember what those hot topics back 10 years ago? Some
of them were like, I would take a paper and kind of explain the paper and then, try to figure out what it meant for our lives. And I would say, the seeds of this field were there even 10 years ago. So it would be things like a diet can induce a very rapid shift in these microbes, this microbial ecosystem in our guts. And so I would try to think about what that meant for my gut health issue. And so even now, it's just we've got a lot more evidence for that, and it's more fine-grained, the knowledge we have. But I think even those basic ideas, some of them were there at the time. So I'd read about how the diet rapidly shift. I really was interested also in probiotics at the time, because when you try to buy a probiotic and you hear how great they are, okay, maybe they'll help my gut health. And then you go to the drugstore or wherever you have, decide to buy them, and you're faced with the shelf of dozens of products. And what do? How do you sort through that? And how do you know which one to reach for? So I was interested in that, and I was looking into the literature, which was, again, just emerging. And I would say, looking back now, about 20 years ago, things really started to get more scientific in that biotics field and with probiotics. And maybe as of 10 years ago, you started to have some interesting meta-analyses and more robust evidence. So I was trying to sort through that.
And are you able to share any more about your own gut health journey and how what you read during those early years informed some changes in your life?
So I, was a busy young professional. I had just gone through grad school, and I think I probably wasn't taking the time to take care of my health the way I should have. I was very focused on, getting my career started and packing a lot into every day and not eating that well. And so I think a lot of things contributed, but I ended up just having these really debilitating symptoms. For example, I remember once I was driving home from work and I had gut pain that was just so severe. I had to pull over and I was like doubled over the steering wheel. I just had to kind of like breathe through it. It was so painful. Out of nowhere. Like I couldn't think of anything that had contributed to that. So this kind of symptom, and I did explore this with a doctor. My doctor tested me for celiac disease. I did not have it, and did a number of other tests, and there was nothing he could tell that was wrong. And so essentially these were functional symptoms. They didn't even quite meet the criteria for IBS, for irritable bowel syndrome. So I was kind of left floating. Like I knew that these were debilitating symptoms, but there was no kind of medical path for me to get better. And that's why I did want to not only just take it into my own hands, try something to get better, but also try to be scientific about it. And back then it was harder, right? There wasn't a lot of information on that sort of case. And now I think it is increasing, and there's more awareness of what IBS is and how it can look, and also some of the interventions such as probiotics that have been tested and do work for that.
And you mentioned that you developed a kind of early interest in probiotics. Is that something that stuck with you? Have you been kind of following that field for, so be cool to hear about that and how that field has evolved over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I approached it with a lot of skepticism and thinking, this is probably kind of snake oil and all the big companies just, want our money and the probiotics don't do anything. But I did really come around to the idea that there is robust science out there, not on every product, in fact, only on the minority of products. But some probiotic strains have, 200 studies showing their efficacy. Some have less. But there is evidence, and there is a real effort by some companies, tends to be kind of the bigger players, to really substantiate what the product does. So, I kind of came around to that knowledge, and I even to this day, I do a lot of work trying to sort through that and really take a scientific perspective on the probiotics to help people, and in fact, some of my projects really are aimed at creating resources that I never had when I was going through my, gut health issues, and have the resources out there so people can sort through that and figure out what probiotic actually might be tested to work for them. And then so they don't waste their money on just trial and error of a bunch of different products.
And we'll definitely get on to all the work that you're doing now, but I'd just like to press a little bit on, given your profile and everything you've done, I'm sure you get lots of messages from people or even just from friends and friends of friends saying, hey, what probiotics should I be taking? Which ones are good? Which ones are not good? And for me anyways, it's quite a difficult question to answer. So it'd be interesting to hear how you deal with that kind of question based on all the expertise you've developed over the last 10 years.
It is a tricky question. I guess the main thing for me is to ask, why do you want to take a probiotic? If it's a specific symptom, then look for the probiotic that's likely to improve that symptom. And there should be a study showing that. if it's for general health, it's a little bit trickier, I think. There are studies that show certain probiotics will do things that are kind of like subclinical. So, for example, they will enhance the gut barrier or reduce certain immune markers. And those are a little nebulous. It's like, well, does that really affect my health, or is that just kind of something going on internally that I might not notice? But you know, if that's compelling to some people and they think, yeah, I think I might want to take that one, then you know, they can look at that evidence. I think definitely knowing what strains you're taking is, also a golden rule. So not taking the products that, if you look at the label, they just have genus and species listed. I mean, it should have the exact strains listed, because that shows a higher quality product and more transparency as to, how they've been tested and what you're putting in yourself.
And certainly in drug development, it's the companies who sponsor all the research anyways. So, you take your drug, or you're prescribed your drug, it's the companies that sponsor. So I suppose there's some parallels there. And now, before I jump into developing bugs as drugs, because I'm sure you've got a view on that, is there anything else that the listener should be mindful of or aware of if they're going about selecting a probiotic? So just to summarize so far, you've talked about strain level specificity, you've talked about trying to find a study, you have those are the two main things that I've got written down. Is there anything else that people should be considering as they potentially take a probiotic?
I think one really important thing as people navigate this world is to make a distinction between live dietary microbes and probiotics. So the way that I think of probiotics, and I think this whole scientific field of probiotics, they're a very specific group of live microorganisms that have the evidence for their efficacy. So they have to be administered, right? Certain microorganisms that are characterized, administered at a certain dose, and they have a health benefit. Those are all the criteria. As opposed to kind of any other safe live microbes. So, you might have LGG as one probiotic strain. That's very specific. It has evidence for health benefits. But then you have, many other kinds of lactobacilli, different strains that, you can consume in things like fermented foods or just even in supplements if you want. And those are just general, and they don't have necessarily any evidence for their health benefits specifically for each strain. But as a whole, so the interesting part is just in the past year or two, some evidence is starting to emerge on if you take a large quantity of almost any safe live microbe, that might, improve your health. The study I'm thinking of is there was a group of scientists who studied they took data from the NHANES survey, and this is a survey done in the US on dietary data in the general population. And then they tried to ascertain how many live microbes people were getting in their diets. And the main sources were fermented foods and fresh fruits and vegetables. And the people that had the highest intake, they cross-referenced that with their health data and found, a range of health benefits. A lower waist circumference, certain blood pressure markers were lower, and they were modest benefits, but they were still benefits on the whole. And so I think it's really cool that we are at this point where, not only can probiotics, improve health in specific ways, but live dietary microbes may improve health in very general ways. So, it's justification to have just more live microbes in your diet in whatever form.
And just to expand on that point a little bit then, so the distinction between probiotics and live beneficial microbes is that the probiotic is a defined strain with some study attached to it that has some known health benefit, ideally through some mechanism, whereas the beneficial microbes are these foods supplements or foods that contain perhaps an uncharacterized amount and type of microorganisms, but you know they're there. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So what are some of the best sources then of live beneficial microbes for patients or just general people?
Yeah, I mean, fruits and vegetables are a source, and depending, I think, on the quality of the fruit and vegetable, and these are raw, right? Because cooking does kill the microbes, but depending on the quality, you may have more or less attached to the fruit and vegetable. And you can imagine, like, measuring those would be really difficult. So that's why they're uncharacterized.
Right.
Like, how many microbes does this carrot have, right? So, and then, of course, fermented foods. And not all fermented foods have live microbes, because things like sourdough bread, for example, have the microbes killed while baking, but many have live microbes. I really like fermented milk products myself. Kefir is just one of my favorites. It's very sour, but just has that really satisfying sour flavor. Yogurts as well, you know, a nice plain yogurt, and you can dress it up with different fibers, nuts and berries. And then other, you know, there are so many fermented foods around the world. And they're all, you know, many are like condiments. So like pickles or chutneys that are naturally fermented, salsa. And then if they are truly, you know, unpasteurized and naturally fermented, then they should have a large quantity of live microbes when you eat them.
And just on the vegetables and fruit side, cooking does kill the microorganisms, but presumably washing them has some impact as well. So on the one hand, you want to wash them to maybe get rid of sort of pesticide residue or anything like that. But on the other hand, you maybe want to preserve the microbes. Have you come across anything that might suggest you should do one thing or the other in your reading and your research?
I mean, from what I understand, even if you wash the fruits and vegetables, so yeah, you definitely want to get rid of any pathogens that might be associated with them. But, you know, even in the fermenting community, often you start with just a raw fruit or vegetable, and the microbes there naturally are starting your ferment, and you certainly do wash them, and it still, you know, will start your ferment. So I understand that, you know, certain microbes, they're just very closely attached, and they feed on the sugars of, you know, the skin or whatever it is of the fruit or vegetable. So they don't necessarily all come off when you wash them. I definitely wouldn't, and I don't use like kind of vegetable soaps or things like that. Like I think that may affect it more.
That makes sense. And with regards to the research that looks at people who have these very fermented food rich type diets, does it correlate with lifespan in addition to health parameters? Have you seen anything there in terms of people who eat more kimchi, kefir, kombucha live longer?
I haven't seen any modern research on that, but definitely there's, you know, back a few centuries ago, this idea from Mechnikov, and he was a scientist that, you know, studied these very long-lived people in Bulgaria. And I believe he worked at the Pasteur Institute, you know, in the era of Louis Pasteur, and they were sort of taking opposite approaches to, you know, live microbes. And Pasteur, of course, felt you needed to kill everything and, you know, isolate everything down, get rid of pathogens. And Mechnikov was of the opinion, you know, enhance these communities, these ecosystems. And then he found this group in Bulgaria. They were, you know, 100 years plus. And he tried to look around for their secret to a long life and decided, you know, maybe unscientifically at the time, but he felt that it was maybe due to the fermented milk they had on a daily basis. So again, I think we need to follow that up into this the scientific era now and see if that's actually the case. But yeah, I wouldn't rule it out because you know, as we age, we get a lot more inflammation. Our gut microbes change, become more eclectic. And so who's to say that this constant dose of, live microbes might not even that out and maybe dampen some of that inflammaging that we experience.
It seems entirely plausible, doesn't it? And are you able to share any other kind of like historic microbiome stories like that where they might have been onto something a while ago? I mean, classic Hippocrates, isn't it, saying all disease begins in the gut and let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food. But are there any other kind of older school stories that you might have come across that could be interesting?
Well, I think I always, this may not be microbiome specific, but it's digestion related. There's an interesting story about how we started to learn about digestion. And I think it's interesting because, I think we progressed. So over time, doctors progressed in how they understand what's happening in digestion because it's a very complex activity. But I guess, and I'm trying to remember the story, but, initially, even, many centuries ago, digestion was understood as just a mechanical process, just literally a squeezing, mashing and squeezing our food through the digestive tract. And really a step forward was made when a doctor encountered someone, names are escaping me right now, but it was an American doctor, and he came across someone who'd had a fistula in their stomach, and it wasn't repairable. It was, a hole right into the digestive tract. And this man had been, in a battle and had this injury. And so the two of them formed a relationship, and then the doctor, asked if he could do some experiments. And he would, put little pieces of food on strings into this hole, pull them out hours later and figure out what happened. And really that was part of how we started to understand digestion as more of a chemical process as well. Because you could see the effects of the chemicals acting in a matter of hours, just, in a certain time frame after eating, they would act on these pieces of food. So, I think in the end, this patient did not, take kindly to it after a while and ran away. But in the meantime, they had a good working relationship. Yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And it sounds like go on, please.
Anyhow, that I think then the next stage after that is sort of our understanding that microbes do participate as well in digestion. So we've just kind of evolved our thinking and now see digestion as this enormously complex process.
Yeah, I was going to say on the subject of microorganisms participating in digestion, we should definitely talk about that. And it extends beyond humans as well, doesn't it? So, for animals, it's a huge deal. Cows and rumen and in horses and so on as well. So there seems to have been like paradigm shift there over the course of the last 10 or 20 years. You were going to say something and then I said something. So can you remember what you were going to say, or?
I was just going to say, after the podcast, I can send you some resources and the names of these individuals. Yeah.
That's fabulous. And we'll put them in the post show notes as well. So that's tremendous. Now, moving back to 2023, you've really got your finger on the pulse of a lot of what's happening in the microbiome field. Are there any kind of key trends, areas that you're particularly interested in at the moment that you're covering through your communication? And kind of what's getting you really excited?
Yeah, I am excited. I mean, both what's happening in the dietary supplements world and the diet world, as well as the drug world. So I think they both have amazing potential, and they're going in different directions, but equally exciting to me. On the diet side, I am really interested in personalizing diets. And, if you talk to dietitians, and I work closely with some of them, they'll say, oh, we've been personalizing diets forever. because even basic things like how much protein you should have depends on your life stage and maybe gender. And so, yes, things, diet is personalized to some extent, but getting finer and finer grained personalizations, I think, is enormously exciting. And I think we all know this. Like we know that food affects us differently because we all know that person who seems to eat a lot of bacon or something and, never gains an ounce. And, I think so intuitively we know diet can be personalized, and what is good for us, may vary slightly, although we do have nutritional guidelines that are, the basics, but to tweak that for each person. And so, I think, several studies have shown that the baseline microbiota you have, the presence or absence of certain species, may affect how you digest a certain food and the benefit you get from it. And I think fiber is turning out to be quite like that. So if there's a given fiber, the benefit you're going to receive from that depends on what is there already. And so now there are products that are trying to get around that and maybe, administer both the live microbe and the fiber substrate you need to work together to get the benefit. And it's even going into the realm of, a little more toward disease. And this is where the paradigm starts to shift a little bit, because typically foods, and even in the regulatory environment, foods and dietary supplements should not be addressing disease. Therefore, general health, shouldn't mention any sort of disease or prevention, when you market these. But I think now it's like some of these products actually are starting to have evidence that they help with parameters of, let's say, type 2 diabetes. And so what do you do there? It's like a safe food or a dietary supplement that actually has an impact on disease. So there is a marketing communication issue there, because at present it's difficult to market something, in a way that does, imply something improving a disease. But, maybe there needs to be a sort of regulatory acknowledgement, or maybe things can change so that people know what foods are going to guide them toward better health or away from disease over time.
And other companies developing these sort of foods as potential drugs, or how is that working at the moment? Are they doing clinical trials with food, or because that seems like that could be quite challenging? Yes. I think the one company I'm thinking of right now is sort of in the space between food and drug, and they have what is called a medical probiotic. And so they do have very robust evidence on, a disease parameter, but they cannot market it as such, but they're sort of, walking this line between food and drug, and I think, feeling out the regulations as they go. So, but I expect there will be more and more of this kind of product and more evidence, as time goes on. It's very hard to prove prevention, right? Because you need very large, expensive studies that look into the future, that track people over time. But I think, we're far enough in the field. Those are starting to come out, or people are thinking of clever ways to have converging evidence that may be the case, and fancy bioinformatic methods that show, a potential preventative effect. So I think, we're getting finer and finer grained. Definitely for example, inflammatory bowel disease, there's starting to be an acknowledgement of certain categories of foods associated with developing the disease. So like processed meats, I can't think of them all, but, various refined sugars,
ultra processed, sugars, that if you're already predisposed to the disease, those may increase, the likelihood that you'll get it. But what I'm excited about is now going deeper and saying, well, is there, a probiotic or type of fermented food that could actually counteract that, and that you're less likely to get the disease, and then people could do that. And I have inflammatory bowel disease in my family. I probably have the genes that predispose me. So I'd be really interested in knowing, some tasty foods I could have that would lower my chances of getting the disease.
What's fascinating, I think, about all of that is for the longest time, people with autoimmune disease and even IBS have successfully self-experimented and got to a point where through their own methodologies, they've managed to suppress the symptomatology in some respects through elimination diets or through, meat only in some cases or through, paleo in some case, that kind of thing. So I think what you're saying is maybe there's some way of getting there faster by profiling your microbiome and it crunching all the data and saying, based on all of that, this is what's going to work for you or not, rather than this long journey of self-experimentation that just might never get there.
Yes, exactly. Like all the trial and error that you go through to realize what works for you. Because I think that's the problem in the scientific literature, and specifically for IBD, is, things will seem promising, and then you'll test them in a large population of people with IBD, and you won't see a signal. Nothing's there. So, and this happens over and over with all kinds of different diets for inflammatory bowel disease. So, like the literature is all over the place, and so obviously patients get very frustrated that there's no guidance on diet, even though they know diet seems to work. So I think it is, like you're saying, like there is a personalized maybe solution that could work for everyone. It's just we don't know how to tell what that is in advance. So yeah, and the microbiome is a really promising way to find that. And we do know in the microbiome in inflammatory bowel disease, it hops all over the place. It's really variable. And so if we could figure out if there's like a way to measure at one point in time or several points in time, or it's, dynamics, how to measure that, and then to go from there to the right intervention, I think that would be very powerful.
Yeah, I love that. I fully agree with you. Now, on the bugs as drug side, what have been some of the latest, most exciting developments on the bugs as drug side, based on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time in the drug side, I think, in this microbiome field, because I think in the past 1 to 2 years, we have seen some approaches that turn out not to work, and some companies have closed their doors. And so, yeah, it's an interesting time of transition. And I think we're heading into a really crucial time for this field because I don't know if you've ever seen the graph of the hype cycle, but for any new innovation, right, there's this cycle where there's an initial like huge interest and excitement, and then a little bit of a drop eventually when that initial excitement wears off. And then you come out into a steady climb of, okay, maybe there's really some potential here. And then it kind of levels off into some real innovations that are moving forward. And so I think right now we're on that initial downward trajectory of like maybe some expectations are being dashed and we're just really taking a hard look at what's really here. But I think that means we're entering that really crucial time where we have to show there is something here. And maybe some of the initial ideas were hastily thought out or something and they didn't work out, but there is something here and we can, move forward with some therapeutics and diagnostics. And so I'm excited to see, this kind of, now that that's been stripped away, all that hype and, that maybe for the past 10 years, we've been on this high. And now, okay, so what are the real, robust approaches? And I am really excited about the ecosystem type therapies and the ones that acknowledge there's a whole ecosystem in the gut or at whatever site. And it may not be one bug that changes it. It may have to be a whole consortium working together. I know there are some challenges in the regulatory sense, like if you want a completely defined consortium, how to do that to, satisfy the requirements of regulators is tricky. But I think in terms of the efficacy, and the efficacy to me is going to win the day. If you can show you can affect a disease that has no other way of affecting it, I think people are going to want that and will find a way forward.
And have you been following any of the specific approaches, like, for example, the fecal transplantation derivatives, if you like, so those that have stool as a starting material? And have you got any personal thoughts on which indications are perhaps likely to benefit based on the work that you've been doing over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think the low-hanging fruit, of course, was recurrent C. difficile, and now in the US, there are 2 therapies, stool-based therapies for that approved. Next to me seems to be ulcerative colitis, and that's, in some research studies that's shown that, there can be improvements. Again, it seems to be a little personal, so maybe we have to drill down a little more into that. But then, beyond that, I think there are a number of other conditions that, gut conditions, even some brain conditions that have shown the glimmer of hope. And I think, it's just not quite as easy as in recurrent C. difficile. And maybe we'll need certain types of communities or selective pressure to, help the community go in one direction or another. But I think, the sky really is the limit with, the types of indications that might respond. So, and autoimmune disease, I think that's a huge one that people think about, is there a common mechanism in autoimmune disease that you could pressure with a microbial ecosystem that would improve a number of different diseases? And again, so that's paradigm shifting again, because in the drug world, it seems like things are so indication specific. But if we had, a type of therapy that would get at something fundamental in the immune system that could improve a number of conditions, what would that mean?
I mean, from a company perspective, that would be fabulous. Say that as someone running a company that's developing bugs as drugs, teasing out something like that where you've got a product that's a platform that could benefit many disease indications is kind of like, the holy grail. If you can, through one pathway or one mechanism, improve on the standard of care of multiple different patient populations with large markets and large unmet needs, then that's amazing. And it's really cool to hear that you think that it could be possible through microbiome therapy. We spoke earlier about healthcare professionals and speaking to your healthcare professional. Have you noticed a change in healthcare professional perception towards the microbiome over the last 10 years or so as you've been kind of working your way through the field and communicating science about the microbiome? I'm asking because some people are still very skeptical, whereas some seem to be fully bought in. And I recall 7 years ago, a lot of people were much more on the skeptical side than bought in. So be interesting to hear how you've seen it evolve.
Yeah, I would agree, because I used to kind of joke that, about 10 years ago, you'd go to these microbiome events and there'd always be the grumpy doctor in the back row, kind of crossing their arms and, being very skeptical. And it's, I kind of get that there weren't a lot of practical applications to this science at that time. Yeah. But I do think, it's becoming a little more mainstream, and also microbiome, but also probiotics. I think there may be an increased acknowledgement of the science behind them. And I guess if you trained more than 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot there. And there was a lot of talk and hype about probiotics where there was little to back it up. So maybe, I think that's also part of it, because probiotics are often one of the most accessible interventions for people. And so, yeah, I definitely see, and I guess I'm trying to think in my own experience whether there's been a change, but yeah, not necessarily. But I do sense more healthcare professionals are talking about it. And as you say, like, there are a lot more champions for this area of science and these types of interventions.
And is your view that everybody should take a probiotic? Or is it specific to individuals? Like, because, kind of everybody should eat their fruit and vegetables. But should everybody have a probiotic?
For me, not necessarily. I think I tend to think that if you have a specific reason, you should take one. Like when I was having my gut health issues, that would be a good time to take a probiotic. Or if I get prescribed antibiotics for a very good reason and I need to take them, and there's also evidence, right, that they reduce antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So yeah. I think those kinds of reasons are great. And as for other things, like for me, I just I take the approach of trying to get live dietary microbes and trying to eat fermented foods as much as I can, trying to have kefir every day. Of course, you can take a product that's characterized and defined. That's also okay. And there are a number of very nice yogurts that actually give you the best of both worlds. You get, a bunch of live microbes and a specific strain that's, let's say, shown to prevent the common cold. So sometimes I have those,
is that
but
a thing?
Other times
is there
I just
strains?
have, yeah.
Sorry, is that a thing? Is there a bacteria that have been shown to prevent the common cold? Because we just had a big outbreak of the cold in our office. Everyone's sort of sniffling and sort of loaded with the cold. So, yeah. So what is that all about? And there's a that sounds cool.
Yeah, I think, so here in North America, it's sold as like a yogurt drink that's a little, maybe 2 ounces or something. And then, the strain in it has evidence that it prevents the common cold and prevents, I guess they've studied it over like a cold season and found people miss fewer days of work or school, and they have less recurrence of, what rhinovirus infection or whatever it is.
Wow. And have they done any work on what the potential mechanism is, or is it just it works? And
that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know enough about that particular strain, but and again, prevention's really tricky to study. So but it might be affecting something to do with immunity in general. But of course, it's not even really the gut, right? Because rhinovirus affects the nose, like that's his point of entry. So it must be something, immune that's going on.
Yeah, so it's drunk. It's not tipped up to your nose.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about some of your books and the writing you've done and what you learned writing those books, and what are some of the key messages for people who might want to go out and buy them?
Great. Yeah. So I have kind of 2 streams with the books. One is sort of the medical education side, and I collaborated with Ed Ishiguro and Natasha Haskey, microbiologist and dietitian. And we wanted to put together a resource for dietitians and other healthcare professionals just to get them up to speed on, this area of the gut microbiome and how it interfaces with diet and with health. So we wrote our first, the first edition was published by Elsevier's Academic Press in 2016, I believe. 2018 maybe. it's a while ago, but we just finished a second edition. Yeah.
Cool. Congrats.
Thank you. We just finished the second. So that was published earlier this year. And that's a much updated version of all the science because it had really, increased in volume. And again, like the basics and the basic messages were still there back in that first edition, but now we just have a lot more evidence and again, maybe slightly different nuances to the information and how we understand, let's say, fiber versus protein versus fats affecting the microbiota. So we've compiled all that. The other stream is for the general public. And I'm very passionate about this because, when I grew up in an area, it was a small town on the prairies, and science wasn't that valued. Like, you didn't come across a lot of people that loved to read Scientific American, or, very science-heavy publications or media. And so my goal is to really make science accessible and to put it into the hands of people who wouldn't necessarily seek out scientific sources. And so the first book I did was The Well-Fed Microbiome, which was a recipe book and just very accessible. So it had 2 chapters covering the science of diet, microbiota, and health, and then a bunch of recipes that were high fiber, basically, and you could put this into practice. And the upcoming book I have is with the Dummies series. It's like the black and yellow Dummies series, and it's the Dummies Guide to Gut Health. And again, I'm super excited.
Really?
Yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah, I think we've all seen the dummy guide to something like that, so that's really cool.
Yeah, and just making it really simple, and I'm excited because it's, the distribution is large. You'll find it in the local library, you'll find it in a big retailer, and, putting and really taking a scientific perspective and showing people how to find the science, like we were just talking about, how to find the science on a probiotic strain and equip them a little better to think more scientifically.
Oh, I really, really love that. Are you able to share any insights into what's going to be in the dummy guide? We've talked about the probiotic piece. Are you able to share any other insights and get people excited about it?
Yeah, I think definitely diet is a big piece. And what are the scientific take-homes based on the science that's going on as to how to support your gut health and overall health through your diet. And I really take the scientific perspective of the definitions of the biotics. So probiotics, prebiotics, symbiotics, and postbiotics, there are scientific definitions of these substances. And I want people to understand that, you need substantiation. And that's part of the definition, is they need to have proof that they improve health. And the other, if they don't meet that criteria, there's something else. So really understanding and even this new emerging area of postbiotics, I expect that people are going to, in the next 2 to 5 years, see a huge number of new products on the market that say they're postbiotics. So then equipping them to know what that is, if something actually meets the criteria, and then what it might do for health.
Could we, for the listener, kind of break down what some of these things are? So we've talked about probiotics. What about prebiotic, symbiotic, and postbiotic?
Right. Yeah. So prebiotics, the scientific definition essentially says, so it has to be a substrate, often fiber, but not necessarily, a special type that exerts a health benefit through the gut microbes by stimulating certain gut microbes. It's agnostic as to what those microbes have to be. It doesn't have to be bifidobacteria or lactobacilli. It could be anything, as long as it confers a health benefit in that way. So it specifies almost a mechanism by which the health benefit comes about. Whereas probiotics themselves, you don't have the mechanism right in the definition. So that's probiotics and prebiotics. And a simple way to explain prebiotics, of course, is, it's almost like fertilizer for the microbes that benefit health. So those are those two. Symbiotics, I think people commonly think of them as a combination of a pro and a prebiotic. It's sort of like that, but it's a little broader, because if you say combination of pro and prebiotic, the implication is you have to have proof that the probiotic is, genuinely benefits health by itself, and so does the prebiotic. But it actually encompasses even novel combinations of live microbes and substrates. Even if on their own they don't benefit health, but you put them together and they do benefit health, that can still be considered a symbiotic.
Interesting. And postbiotics?
Postbiotics. So this one is a little controversial in the field, I have to say, because previously some people had started to use the word postbiotic for metabolites that are produced by the microbiota. And so these are things like butyrate or, TMAO. There's a number of different metabolites, whether, beneficial or detrimental. But going back several decades ago in Japan, a researcher advanced the idea of metagenics, and I believe that's how it got translated to English, but essentially these were killed microbes. And so I think the historical perspective is important because these were common substances and food companies in Japan started putting them into products. They were, once viable microbes that were killed deliberately and put into things and did confer a health benefit. So then a group of scientists led by the International Scientific Association for Pro and Prebiotics, they created all of these definitions by scientific consensus, but the latest one was postbiotic. So they got together and they decided, that would essentially be the definition, inactivated microbes that did confer a health benefit. So some people reacted strongly and they said, no, we already use this term to refer to metabolites. But I think now it seems like more and more are coming around to this way of thinking that postbiotics essentially, they've been inactivated or made non-viable in some way. So, and they're obviously very attractive commercially because you don't have to worry about keeping them alive to shelf life. And so I expect we'll see a lot more types of products like this.
Some of the listeners might be thinking, hang on a minute. I thought it was all about giving live microorganisms to confer a health benefit. So how can a dead microorganism confer a health benefit if it's dead?
Yeah, so not all of them do, but when they do, they may have the same sorts of mechanisms as live, microbes. So again, mechanisms is a tricky area. Not a lot are known, and it's, many companies probably don't find it worthwhile to look into the mechanism of their products, but there are a number of ways. A dead microbe may affect the microbial community just the same as if it were live. It depends on the active, piece of it. If it's part of the membrane or, certain protein, then maybe it still could be active when it's not living. So I guess, it just depends on mechanism and, through trial and error and more experimentation, I guess the companies will find out which ones are still conferring the health benefit when they're dead.
Thank you for that. I've really loved how much we've looked into the future in this conversation. And I wondered if you could try and, with some sort of crystal ball or close your eyes and imagine where the field would be in 5 years and then maybe in 50 years and then sort of articulate that to the listener. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, so in 5 years, I hope, and it's my goal, and this is what I do every day, is try to increase general people's knowledge about this area. And I hope that in 5, maybe 10 years, people will be demanding, what's the evidence? And that we'll go, and there's a lot of talk about wellness hype in general. And just how susceptible people are to, marketing and celebrity endorsements and influencers when, what we really could focus on is the science and the actual evidence of how something works. And so I hope we'll see a savvier general public that's going to ask for more evidence. And that will push more companies to provide that evidence. And maybe some of the companies that don't have it and don't care to have it, they're going to shut their doors, because it's not worth being in that market. So that's what I hope, that people will think more scientifically and then we'll have more products and, maybe things like a gut microbiome test to determine the best sorts of fiber for you that will, give you certain benefits. So I think it'll be general at first, and then, moving more into that 50-year time frame. I hope that
hard to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a
50
long
years
time
is a
away.
long way in advance.
Yeah, but I do hope that by then, we'll have not only microbial therapies, the kind that your company is developing, and that they'll be a very important part of the, clinical toolbox for certain conditions, but that we'll also have a number of preventative interventions. And, Rob Knight, one of the most prominent microbiome scientists, raised this idea of a microbial GPS. And that maybe, this is like sci-fi scenario right now, but
this is cool.
Yeah, that you could have a toilet that would sample your microbes every day and then, feed the data into some processor that would tell you, oh, okay, you need to eat more of this, or you need to take this supplement because you're heading in a direction with your microbial community, that might predispose you to this disease X. And maybe it would be combined with genetic information because, a lot of predisposition is genetic. So then you take all that information and it would give you an output that would tell you what, how to shape your diet that day. I think that would be incredible. And we're obviously very far from that right now, just in terms of microbial communities. Yeah. But that's the other thing, is that some of the most exciting research to me is, taking that more holistic ecosystem perspective. And I think that might be what's really going to push this field forward. Rather than being so reductionistic, looking for the right strain or substrain, right, that's so effective. Looking at the ecosystem. And I hear right now macroecologists saying, like, why don't you look at our work and learn something about how ecosystems work and apply it to the micro. So I think those conversations are starting to happen, less siloing in the academic communities. But I think, if you put those together, that could be a powerful way to advance the science.
Thanks so much for that look into the future. I love it. And I know we've got smart toilets. If you go to Japan, you do have a smart toilet, but it's more about it kind of opening and shutting and spraying you and that kind of stuff. So I think we've got a long way to go before we've got a toilet that can analyze our microbes. Although I do recall, I think there's 2 Rob Knights in this field, isn't there? Maybe I've got that wrong.
Possibly.
There's another Knight Dan Knight. Sorry, it's Dan Knight, not Rob Knight. And he's done a lot of work. And I think Dan Knight, I think he did some stuff on this smart toilet, and they had a project going. They maybe have a project going right now, I recall. Looking for people to donate. Yes, that
sounds familiar. Yeah, they're kind of testing one out. Yeah.
Yeah, they're testing one out in the west coast of America, I think, or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. You mentioned Rob Knight and him being a kind of pioneer. Are there any other sort of forefront figures in the microbiome space that people could familiarize themselves to get up to speed with cutting edge research?
Yeah. I remember attending a Keystone conference. I think it was in 2014, and now I look back and I'm like, so many of the top, thought leaders, if you want to say, or top scientists in the field were there sharing their work. So the people I think of, Yasmin Belkade is fantastic. She works a lot on the immunity piece and how infections, for example, can affect immunity even over the long term, even when the infection clears. So I love her work. Frederick Backhead, he works a lot on the metabolic side of the microbiome and how it affects metabolic health. Andrew McPherson does a lot with the immune system and various clinical conditions. Yeah, Justin Sonnenberg is one of the voices as far as diet and fiber and how that affects health. So yeah, I'm just thinking, and they were all there in the room, so it was kind of incredible. Of course, yeah, there are hundreds, thousands of microbiome researchers now, many who've come, yeah, by way of other fields. But I still think, yeah, some of those people, and Jeff Gordon is, of course, amazing and doing great work with malnutrition now. And yeah, so some of those initial people, yeah, are still kind of crushing it with the microbiome research.
This conference in 2014, have they repeated it? Or was it like a one-off, like let's get everyone together kind of thing?
So it was a Keystone conference that was specifically designed around the topic of the microbiome. And I think nowadays the Keystone conferences, they do still have them around the microbiome, but they tend to be more specific topics. So yeah, like they might have an entire conference dedicated to the metabolic effects of the microbiome or the gut-brain effects. So yeah, it's a little more niche now. I guess that's the consequence of a growing field, is that you tend to just now have conversations with more, specific areas of the field.
One of your roles, I guess, is to try and pull out all the best work from all the different parts of the field and share that with people. What are some of the biggest challenges associated with the field growing so quickly and trying to distill what's key and what's not key? Because I heard from someone called Alan Walker, who's coming on the podcast soon. He works at the Rowett Institute. His Twitter handle's Fecal Matters. And he said to me at some point, like, it's actually impossible to keep up now, because there's like 100 publications every day or something like that. So how do you distill what's new and amazing amongst all of that like tidal wave of information?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Alan. I actually met him, had a conversation with him probably last year. And yeah, I think it is hard because, yeah, initially 10 years ago, I was able to look at the paper alerts every day and kind of keep on top of things, But now it's just impossible. I do use other people a lot. So, on social media, for example, someone will highlight a paper they're excited about. Social media, again, I mean, this could be a whole other conversation, but it is changing. The landscape is changing quite a lot. And so I find myself being just a little more eclectic in where I look on social media, like across different platforms. And it's also variable as to who's on what platform, Twitter used to be the place where you could find all the scientists. And I think there was a golden age, up to 2020 or so. And now it's like, it's a bit more fragmented. And some people have left Twitter because I think, or now X, it's not quite the same level of conversation that we had before. So, but I think there are numerous platforms. I found Mastodon to be quite nice it feels just like having a few scientists in your living room and chatting about things. Like it's still that kind of smaller scale that just feels really comfortable. And then there's, like Blue Sky. I haven't gone on there yet, but I've been hearing good things. And then Instagram and Threads. Yeah.
I hadn't heard of either of those two platforms before, so I'll make a note and check them out.
And I mean, it's challenging knowing where to put your effort at this point, because you could really focus on one platform and try to grow your, conversations there, but that might not be where everyone ends up. So yeah, I just think it's just becoming a more fragmented landscape. It's not an easy question as to where to go for information, but it is definitely still how I tend to find out what's new and what people are excited about, and then kind of share and integrate that in my work.
And do you still attend conferences that are face-to-face, or is most of your sort of downloads and information gathering online now?
I do still attend conferences. I was at a couple this year that were really amazing. And actually for me, just as my trajectory as a communicator, writer. I'm also interested in going a little beyond the human. I've been very focused on human work, but I attended this conference, the Gordon Research Conference on symbiosis. And
Oh, wow. That sounds awesome.
yeah, and it was just so incredible to realize, I guess, like the evolutionary history of hosts relying on their microbes and vice versa. And just, yeah, from, beetles to worms to corals, like so many creatures rely on their microbes. And just taking that perspective, that umbrella perspective. So I think for me, I want to go a little bigger in my microbiome writing and think more holistically, write about more like these earth systems and these animals that are so fascinating. And then bring it down again to the human and what that means for human. And, the fact that we rely on our microbes, we evolved that way. So yeah, that's my kind of direction. And I love going to conferences because they kind of open your mind like that. And the other one then was this year was the ISAP conference that, the group I was talking about that made the definitions of the biotics. Nice. And again, there it's more specific stuff about the effects of the biotics, personalized medicine, that kind of thing. So just kind of bringing all these disparate areas together and trying to make sense out of them.
Can we talk a little bit about symbiosis as a concept, right? So you've done a lot on human symbiosis, but what about other systems and other parts of the planet? Did that conference trigger your thinking? You talked about beetles and things like that. Is it just like a ubiquitous, highly conserved thing that something lives in symbiosis with something else?
It really is. And, I think the issue is that much work in biology has not taken that perspective. But when you do, it's extremely powerful. Like one story that I remember is about corals. And, you may have seen in the news this summer, the oceans are really warming. And the corals, I guess that's bad for their health. They start to bleach. And corals are really key, in the ocean ecosystem. So that's a really bad thing. But if you take the perspective of symbiosis, first of all, understanding corals live in symbiosis with the microbes that, attach to them, and that they're really important for coral health. They can prevent bleaching. And so what are can you think of any creative approaches to helping that symbiosis occur despite a higher temperature? And there were some presentations on some possible ways to do that. I can't remember exactly what the interventions were, but
a coral transplant?
Essentially helping, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Helping them adapt to this new environment by not only, changing the coral, but also changing its associated microbes. So it's like using that relationship to make it more robust. So I think that's super cool, and it could happen across all different types of ecosystems and make us, way more resilient to the things that are happening to our planet.
Fabulous. Now, just before we wrap up, it'd be great for you to share with us what's coming next for you. You've talked about focusing more on perhaps other microbial systems within other species beyond humans. You've talked about some of the things you're excited about in terms of personalized dietary manipulation, and also how the bugs as drugs groups are progressing forward. It's a critical time at the moment. We're on that part of the hype cycle where we just need to deliver. But for you as a science communicator, what's coming next beyond the gut health for dummies, which I think is just amazing? Really excited for that.
Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, at this moment, right now till November, I'm heads down, working on this gut health for dummies project. I think after that, what I'm planning to do, well, first of all, to take kind of a long look at the social media platforms and figure out where to invest my time and where to start producing content. I'm considering more video content. We'll see. And then, also moving into more pitching to different publications and a variety of publications. Sharing kind of how this field of science is advancing and evolving, how symbiosis can help change our perspective. So really, I'm intending to go more diverse after this book is done, and
cool.
Reach all kinds of different audiences. Because as I say, like, occasionally I do write for places like Nature Outlook, but it's essentially preaching to the choir, like with people who already value science. But what my challenge is that I love to do is like reach out to people, who may not, even like the word science, and they're actually turned off by it, but see how I can engage them and show them that it's just super exciting and it's relevant to everyday life.
Is that what gives you a real buzz? Converting someone who wasn't interested before into,
Absolutely.
Can tell by your passion.
Yeah, and kids too. And I have 2 kids, and I think, it's just so important to me to like model that excitement toward science and really kind of like show how, like, make that connection between what we eat, what's on our table, and like what I know from my work, talking to scientists. So that's, basing our daily decisions on what scientists know, and that can go across, all kinds of things. And then the next time we have a pandemic and have to have a vaccine, they understand that's how things,
right.
How we do things, like watch the scientists and then apply, what they say.
Have you got any tips for parents who are trying to get their kids to eat gut-friendly foods that might be helpful, or is that an impossible ask?
No, it's still tricky, and I have one eater in my household who's very selective, and it's funny though, because this morning, my son wanted white toast for breakfast. And then we were joking around, and I was saying, "Oh, but your microbes are saying, don't let me die, don't let me die." So,
Love that.
I get very dramatic about it.
And they said, "I don't care."
And so eventually he had an apple. Yeah, that's true. Most of the time he said that, but he did eat some apple too. So trying to say like, well, what fiber are they going to have? They need to be fed too. So that's kind of our approach. It's a bit lighthearted. But always just, nice. Presenting the foods that are high in fiber and are going to help their gut bugs.
That's it. And how then does a person with a busy family life focus to get great content in the form of your writing? Are you like a night owl? Do you wake up super early? Have you got like a ritual that gets the creative juices going? Like what works and what doesn't work? I
am quite a night owl, it's true. So I do find, I try to work in the day, but again, I am involved in like my kids' school and different, parenting things. So it can be hard to find long focused time in the day, but I do find, in the evening, I can sit down for a longer time and really dig into something. So it does mean like some late nights and, then I lose a bit of sleep, but at least, that generally seems to work for me. And I do like the flexibility of working for different people and on my own schedule. And eventually, the deadlines get met.
Love that. Well, Kristina, thank you so much. We've been talking now for about an hour and 20 minutes. We've covered a huge amount: prebiotics, probiotics, drugs, bugs as drugs, science communication. Really grateful for you coming on, and really keen to stay in touch and see how you progress with your upcoming books.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the chance to talk.